I'm going to test how the mic works at different positions here to see how much feedback we're getting. Okay, so our next panelist is Jill Stein, who is an organizer, physician, and environmental health activist. She has led initiatives promoting healthy communities, local green economies, and the revitalization of democracy, addressing issues such as environmental, economic, and racial justice, campaign finance reform, green jobs, and the cleanup of incinerators, coal plants, and toxic substances. She was a principal organizer for the Global Climate Convergence for People, Planet, and Peace over Profit. Previously, she served on the Massachusetts and National Boards of Directors for Physicians for Social Responsibility, where she worked on environmental health and nuclear disarmament.
Oh, okay. Yeah, how's that? All right, great. We'll give this a try. Yeah, so thank you. Thanks everybody for being here. Thanks to the organizer. Thank you to the Peace House for hosting us here. And thank you, Virginia, for that very wonderful, I guess, sort of official view of the conference. I have a very unofficial view of the conference. I was there as an insurgent, a presidential candidate with a very different point of view. And, you know, I'll say that I was outside of the official conference. I actually did have observer status, but I didn't wind up using it. And I was out in the People's Climate Summit and at an event, a forum that I was able to do jointly with the deputy chief negotiator from China and with many indigenous members of indigenous tribes from the Northwest. And it was this very interesting mix of China, U.S., progressive viewpoint, and indigenous tribes. And at the Climate Summit, I'll just say, I wound up doing several workshops on on climate and militarism and climate and war. And it felt really good to be doing that because the summit and the COP, in my experience, was not only about the climate crisis, it was also about the war crisis because the war had come to Paris in the form of the terrorist blowback that had just happened. So it was very much on people's minds. And the crisis in democracy was also very much on people's minds, especially the climate justice movement, which was precluded from having its demonstrations and its gatherings. So it was like the voice of people was being silenced, but the voice of industry that was well represented inside of the official COP was going strong. And having heard, before I left the country to join the COP, having heard the president's remarks, which basically said that Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg were going to save us, so no worries about the climate, you know, things were going strong, and, you know, and then sort of scoped out the agreement. It made me feel extremely skeptical about what was going on inside of the official COP and made me much more interested and invested in the people's movement that was congregating there. And I have to say that in these workshops, which is what came first for me, one was with the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, which was hosting a climate and war workshop. It was very exciting. It felt like we were not only looking the climate crisis in the face, but we were really looking at this incredible blowback from 14 years of this failed war on terror as well, that has only created failed states and massively increased the power of organized global terrorist movements, ISIS and the likes, the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, et cetera, whatever you want to look at by any measure. That has gotten much worse. And also the massive refugee crisis. So there was real consciousness of grappling with that and needing to face both of those problems and to understand how we had to really have a systemic fix to address them both. And there was, I must say, there was really, in my experience, there was great feeling about, this is it, folks. It's time to stop fiddling around the margins, that we really need a fundamental and unified challenge here among the various justice movements, the justice movements and the peace movement and the climate movement, which are really, we're not going to solve this one piece at a time. We really need a unified and comprehensive approach. And I'll come back to sort of specific positions that we were advocating there. So the other crisis, I think, that was very much on display was, again, this crisis of democracy. So all three of them converging. WILPF, the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, was one of the workshops. The other one was a French organized workshop, but it was a lot of the European peace groups that were there to grapple with this. And then the other event was this forum, so-called, put on by the Belong organization, which is a nonprofit that works to develop renewable energy in China. And that was extremely interesting and inspired, having the indigenous tribes there, as well as the Chinese, and then our sort of Green Party participation. And it was extremely provocative, and it was sort of a person-to-person, across the globe, how can we make this work together, following in the footsteps of the indigenous tribes who've really kind of put out the vision here. How can we rally around this, and how can we break through the institutional barriers? And that was, I have to say, very uplifting. I want to mention the two solutions that we were really putting forward. And first, let me just say a few other words about the official outcome. While there's a lot of good, aspirational language here, it's mostly language without enforcement, without mechanism. It is voluntary, and even at that, the best it will do is 3.5 degrees centigrade over pre-industrial levels. So, and it also, eliminated the respect for indigenous rights and their incorporation into the agreement, and it also eliminated the real commitments of climate justice and reparations and support for that transition that the developing world needs to make. So personally, I share the James Hansen point of view that this did not get us there. It didn't begin to get us there, and what made it especially, or I should say made me especially skeptical, was that at the same time, the Obama administration and the White House and Congress were lifting the ban on fossil fuel exports, which amounts to creating 350 new coal plants, at the same time that they were approving a new major pipeline, and also including in the budget agreement language that essentially expedites permitting for pipelines. So that fact, in the face of this much ballyhooed agreement, behind closed doors, the absolute opposite of that agreement taking place, to me says where this is really going. And I want to just very quickly describe what we were putting on the table as the way forward, and we were discussing this with China in the sense of how could we, as grassroots movements, really leapfrog ahead against this sort of old school view, which is really dictated by fossil fuel companies and predatory banks and war profiteers, who basically sponsor our two establishment political parties and are calling the shots far too much, most of the time, I would say. We're calling for a Green New Deal, which means an emergency program like the New Deal that got us out of the Great Depression, a Green New Deal which will achieve 100% clean renewable energy by 2030. After Pearl Harbor was bombed, it took us 6 months. We declared a national emergency. It took us 6 months to move the economy to 25% of GDP on a wartime footing. We're calling for doing that now over the next 15 years to move to 100% clean renewable energy. If we thought Pearl Harbor, was a threat to the health and well-being and the security of the United States, that doesn't hold a candle to what we are looking at now, what we are on the threshold of if we don't undertake dramatic reforms now. So we're calling for 100%, creating 20 million jobs now, focused on creating that green economy, green energy, a green agricultural system, a sustainable local food production, as well as transportation, restoring infrastructure and ecosystems. With 20 million jobs, you can actually do that. And guess what? The good news is that the energy transition pays for itself just looking at the health benefits and the costs of the incredible epidemics that we are currently afflicted with right now from fossil fuel production. So this is a win-win. It pays for itself. It revives the economy, which desperately needs a New Deal type solution. It transitions and turns the tide on climate change, and it makes wars for oil obsolete. This is what we deserve, this is what we need, and we should settle for nothing less. And I want to give a big shout out to all the grassroots groups here in Portland who are really leading the way for the nation in how we achieve this, in the way that you have fought back one piece of fossil fuel infrastructure after the other. I say go Portland. The rest of us need to take a lesson from you. And the City Council resolution that there will be no further construction of fossil fuel infrastructure needs to go national, and we are pushing for that as well, that nationally we have an immediate moratorium on all further fossil fuel infrastructure, and we expedite the transition that our lives and the future of the planet depend on now.